Welcome to all of you, and thanks for joining us for today's Kindergarten Matters webinar, Identifying and Supporting Children with Diverse Learning Needs. This is the second webinar in the Kindergarten Matters webinar series, focused on supporting students in the kindergarten year to ensure that they're set up for success in their classroom and beyond. In today's conversation, we'll be diving into the importance of identifying and supporting children with diverse learning needs. This can apply to many students, like those who have a learning disability, students who are disabled, students who might need extra support in the classroom, and many others. Early identification for these students enables timely intervention, providing children with the support they need to thrive academically and socially. But what can these early supports and identifications look like? What are ways in which we can fully support these students in order to develop a sense of inclusivity within the classroom? And how can we ensure that teachers, families, and students are able to collaborate effectively in order to uplift every young child's potential in the kindergarten year? Our esteemed panelists today are going to help us in answering some of those questions and highlight some of the important work that they're doing along the way. It's my pleasure to now introduce them. Sue Boniuto is the Director of Strategic Initiatives for Early Bird and has been with the project since its incubation and validation at Boston's Children's Hospital. Sue joined the Early Bird founding team in 2020 to develop strategic partnerships with schools, content partners, and funders to grow the product and set up Early Bird to scale quickly and efficiently. Rafael Hart is the Executive Director of Educare of Omaha, Inc., joining the team in December 2017. Since 1992, Rafael has worked continuously in early childhood education as a teacher, professional development facilitator, and administrator. For 28 of his 30-plus year early childhood education career, Rafael has administered comprehensive, high-quality programs in Louisiana, North Carolina, Virginia, D.C., Tennessee, and Nebraska, providing programmatic oversight and strategic thought leadership for both for-profit and not-for-profit organizations. Nicole Ormandy is the Senior Director of Content Development at AIM Institute for Learning and Research. In this role, Nicole is responsible for the design and development of the AIM Pathways product solutions. Nicole consults regularly with researchers and literacy experts across the nation to synthesize and disseminate practical information and evidence-based strategies through presentations and online course content. Nicole was previously an elementary and special education teacher, where she wrote curriculum and mentored colleagues and student teachers. And Robai Warunga is an assistant professor of special education in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction in the School of Education, University of Massachusetts, Lowell. Her research focus is in early academic and behavioral interventions through multi-tiered systems of support. Warunga's target population is students with or at risk for emotional and behavioral disorders and/or learning disabilities, with a focus on culturally and linguistically diverse learners. In addition, Warunga does research on strategies that foster and promote meaningful family and school relations, as well as family engagement. Glenna Wright Gallo is the Assistant Secretary in the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services at the United States Department of Education. In this capacity, she serves as advisor to the U.S. Secretary of Education on matters related to the education of children and youth with disabilities, as well as employment and community living for youth and adults with disabilities. And guiding us through today's conversation and sharing her own insights on this topic will be Michelle Knapik. Michelle Knapik is the president of the Emily Hall Tremaine Foundation, where she has helped to shine a light on the importance of supporting early school success for children with learning differences. Michelle and Tremaine have been longtime partners of the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, including Tremaine's leadership in the research and release of the publication Don't Diss Our Kids, focused on promoting reading proficiency for children with dyslexia. Welcome to all of you panelists, and thank you. We look forward to engaging with you and learning from you. And I will now pass it over to you, Michelle, to get the conversation started.
Thank you, Sierra. You know, it's really special for us to be here. Tremaine Family Foundation is 35 plus years old, and all of our education giving has been devoted to learning differences. And it's because it's a very personal journey for almost every member of the Tremaine family. So we have been personally and professionally, understanding what it takes to help kids who are neurodiverse, who have specific learning disabilities and learning differences, to reach success. And it's been a long journey, I think, as many of you know. So 35 years ago, it was all about awareness and just helping to ensure that people knew that dyslexia and related learning differences were real, that their kids weren't lazy, that we shouldn't wait to intervene with these kids. You know, I feel like we've almost had generations of collective trauma around kids who haven't met reading success, but yet we know now from the neuroscience that they can, that we can create the systems for them to succeed. And science of reading can start in kindergarten and even earlier. And I think our panelists are really going to bring what's achievable right now to light, and then where we can go together collectively, higher impact. And, you know, these systems of change feed each other, right? The policy is constantly feeding the research is feeding the policy, the practice, the implementation science, right, behind putting these things into practice continues to feed the whole system. And then what's happening at the community level in terms of policy, program, and practice as well. That's where this conversation is going to lead us. Let's keep thinking about, like, how do we continue to create a stronger shared vision about the earliest point we can understand and identify reading challenges and set our kids up for success. So with that, well, let's start at the policy level, at the highest level. So when we're talking about the Department of Education, the US Department of Education, I'm so thrilled that we have the Assistant Secretary today. Glenna, can you help us set the stage a little bit more, and just you and Secretary Cardona and the Raise the Bar initiative and what's happening there today?
Great. I would love to, Michelle. Thank you so much. So in January of 2023, Secretary Cardona rolled out his Raise the Bar, Lead the World initiative, and it's intended to be a bipartisan effort. This came along with the same time as the passing of the American Rescue Plan, or ARP, which provided $130 billion in funding for states to reopen schools following the pandemic. And it began the work of providing resources aimed at closing longstanding academic achievement gaps. Following the passing of the American Rescue Plan, then we had the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, or BISCA, which provided more than $1 billion for schools with community-centered mental health supports. This was all part of the work, and to move forward, making sure that our P-12 education system provided excellent results for every student, no matter what their background was. So looking at this, we have the three main areas of Raise the Bar. We have the first one, which is achieving academic excellence by accelerating learning and delivering a comprehensive and rigorous education for every student. That really tied into where you started talking about kind of research and evidence-based practices. The science of reading, right, falls firmly under achieving academic excellence. The next part is really looking at how do we boldly improve learning conditions. And there we have to start by eliminating the educator and provider shortage that we see in our schools and our programs. We need to make sure that we have affordable and diverse pipelines for making sure that we have providers who are appropriately trained for the children that they're serving. And we need to make sure that we're investing in every student's mental health and well-being, as well as the staff who serve them. And then the third area is creating pathways for global engagement. We want to make sure that every student has a pathway to college and career. And for children with disabilities, we want more pathways, more opportunities, not less because of their disability. And we also want to provide a pathway to multilingualism. We know that a large portion of our population speak multiple languages, and English may not be their first language. So how do we really use that to strengthen their educational opportunities rather than limit them? So that is the plan that Secretary Cardona rolled out. And I think it really sets the stage for our conversation here today. around what we are looking at with like the kindergarten year and making sure that we have a strong foundation early on.
That's a really impressive framework. Thank you for like laying that all out. Can you unpack a little bit more about what some of the initiatives look like and supports to these student population here?
Happy to do so. And if you don't mind going to my next slide, you're going to see it's going to show the OSER's priorities and mission. So the work of the office that I lead, the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services, encompasses the Raise the Bar priority. And it really starts with our mission, which is to raise expectations and improve outcomes. So you can see there, we're looking at improving outcomes in early childhood education and employment outcomes for all people with disabilities, their families, their communication, and their nation. But it really comes down to raising expectations and improving outcomes. To do that, we're focusing on the diverse and prepared workforce that's able to meet the unique needs of individuals with disabilities of all ages. So starting with our youngest learners and going into adulthood. We also want to make sure that we really use and leverage research and evidence-based practices, as well as accessible educational materials and technology for inclusive in-person learning, remote learning, as well as employment opportunities with peer models. And this all starts again with our youngest learners. We have to make sure that we authentically and actively engage families, making sure that those who know individuals with disabilities best, including those individuals with disabilities, and that we're working with the educators, providers, and communities to identify the successes, barriers, and needs of this population so that we can be responsive. And we want to make sure that we're investing in data-aligned strategic activities. All of this means that we have to build this comprehensive, inclusive, and responsive instruction and intervention system. Again, looking at how do we raise expectations and improve outcomes. Now, I know that you share the same vision, right? One in which we support and develop an inclusive and effective learning environment that prepares all of us for the future. A future for which our individual needs are planned for proactively, that seeks out diverse perspectives and experiences, all in an effort to provide coordinated and seamless services that not only support continuous learning and progress, but also result in improved outcomes. At ED, we know that the kindergarten year, that first formal at-scale learning opportunity that many children experience, represents that critical juncture when effective supports and developmental experiences could close the gap and put more children on a path to early school success. We're working in ED across my department of OSERS, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Ed, and the Office of English Language Acquisition, as well as in partnership with Health and Human Services, to identify and meet the individual developmental needs of children, paying special attention to the transition into kindergarten, as well as the kindergarten year, and then transition into first grade. We know that this requires schools working more closely with families, and that early care and education providers have to provide instructional continuity and inclusive learning environments, not only in preschool and in kindergarten, but in early grades as well. We also recognize, like I said, that we have an increasing number of students who are English learners, and that working with their families is even more critical to support that early language development and identify where children are experiencing delays and may possibly have a disability, and have to identify the additional supports or differentiation that's needed. We've been doing a couple of things with technical assistance using the Kindergarten Sturdy Bridge learning community that's supporting 17 states through a community of practice. We have cross-agency joint inclusion statements around kindergarten transition. And then we have guidance out on new Title I guidance, as well as a Dear Colleague letter on early school success. We're also looking at guidance that has assistive technology needs of children of all ages, starting at birth through adulthood. We know that early learning doesn't end at preschool, and to improve outcomes, including those that we see at 3rd grade, we have to pay far closer attention to the kindergarten year, where we see a widening gap. And then this requires additional professional learning and supports for early grade educators and families. So I really appreciate the opportunity today to speak with you about those efforts. Looking back at high expectations for children with disabilities, inclusive models, and using those evidence-based practices in responsive instruction.
Thank you, Glenna. That's a real rethink, reset, and systems changing framework. So very much appreciate that. Now I'm gonna ask Nicole to come on. And so AIM Institute for Learning and Research is a grantee, a longtime grantee of the Tremaine Foundation. And, you know, if you want a private LD school that is doing the best on research to practice on the neuroscience around kids with learning differences and specific learning disabilities, AIM is really a beacon in the field. And Nicole, I think you can really help us like go deeper into sort of early literacy development here, and what kind of skills and things we're even expecting of kids in the kindergarten and early years.
Yes, thank you for your compliment of AIM. Really, everything that we put into practice at AIM starts with research. So our teachers know what early literacy development is, know which behaviors they're looking for, so that they can identify, yes, students are making developmentally appropriate progress or not. So really, all of that begins with our understanding of how reading develops, from emergent readers all the way through proficient readers. And we know a lot of this based on the work of Dr. Linnea Airy, who you see on screen, who is notable for her phase theory. So each phase that you see on the right correlates to specific reading behaviors and characteristics. So Dr. Airy explains that there are 4 phases in that journey towards proficient reading, but the phases aren't exclusive. So readers can demonstrate behaviors between phases. It's not really just a concrete black and white thing. So I want to draw your attention to the early emergent readers. I put that box on the bottom 2 phases. So these are going to be the readers that are demonstrating behaviors in the pre and the alphabetic phases. So next slide, let's talk about first that pre-alphabetic phase. So our understanding, really thinking about emergent readers and characteristics that they'll show, is that these readers lack phonemic awareness initially. So that's that awareness that individual sounds make up words. They also may or may not know their letters. So that means their letter names. So A, B, C, especially when letters are in their names. We typically see students learn the letters in their names more quickly or first. If they've started learning letter names, though, they're not yet forming the connections between letter names like B and the sound that's represented by B. So therefore, because they're not yet sure of the connection between letter names and the sounds, they're not really able to read yet, right? So if they came to a word, they are just guessing, or if they pick up a book, they're just reading a story, telling a story in their own words, because they are pre-readers at this phase. So the same would go for spelling, which is what you see here on the screen, right? You see there are letters on that writing sample, but the student's not spelling phonetically yet. So they are aware, the plus is that they are aware that these squiggles on a page represent letters, and that's how we can convey meaning, but it's all non-phonetic still. We're not yet sure about those connections between letters and sounds. So think about your child or your students. Can you recognize a student who shows these types of behaviors? Maybe they're a little bit more advanced. So next slide, maybe they're in the partial alphabetic phase. Next slide. Thank you. In the partial phase then, some characteristics. So that was my like pre-K kids, right? Now I'm in kindergarten, early first grade, some behaviors that would be developmentally appropriate are that we're starting to acquire phonemic awareness. So maybe students can sort and match picture cards by words that share the same initial sound. If they had a picture card of a bat and a ball, they would put them together and they would leave the cat to the side because it does not share the same initial B sound. Maybe they can generate rhymes or count syllables in spoken words, basketball. Maybe they know letters, shapes, and names, but not all of the sounds. So they're starting to make connections between letters like B and B, but not every letter sound is completely known to memory yet. So if these students come to a word, maybe I show them a nonsense word, a non-word, and I want to see if they can apply their decoding skills. That's a type of assessment that's often given. These students may still have difficulty with that type of assessment because they're not fully formed those connections with letters, sounds so proficiently in order to read words. With spelling, let's take a look at the sample on the screen. The words are being spelled partially phonetically, right? Some sounds are being represented correctly. Some sounds are still missing from being represented. So think about your students or your children. Do they possess any of these characteristics beyond first grade? That would be problematic. Within kindergarten, that's still developmentally appropriate. So we want to realize, what are we expecting of students within first grade to recognize words with shared sounds, to recognize words that rhyme, to know their letter names, know their letter shapes, begin to read and spell words correctly, or begin to represent those sounds correctly with letters. So we really just need to assess, we need to pay attention to behaviors that our young children are exhibiting and be able to demonstrate whether those behaviors mean they're on track or whether we should be concerned. Is their developmental progress typical or atypical?
Love that developmental roadmap, Nicole. Really important things to really cue in on. And other things also to look at for kids who are maybe more at risk, and then the instructional answer to that to helping with early literacy skill development. Can you go into that a little bit?
Exactly. So if we're aware of phase theory and we recognize what are the typical behaviors, then what does it mean when students aren't showing the typical behaviors? What are some early warning signs that students may be at risk for language-based learning disabilities? So I'm focusing again on language-based learning disabilities, literacy development. Warning signs within 4 to 5-year-olds within that realm may be things like difficulty hearing or producing words with the same initial sound. So the word ball starts with B. I may say, what other words start with B? Or listen to these two words, bath and tub. Which word starts with B? And so I'm finding out, are students meeting that type of developmental milestone that we'd expect, or is that a warning sign? Also, do they have difficulty learning and recalling letter names, including letters in their own name? Difficulty forming letters and numbers, even if it's to spell non-phonetically, right? Think back to that first writing sample we looked at where there are letters represented, but it was not phonetic. That was still a thumbs up to that the student was representing and forming letters for that developmental appropriateness. If they were in kindergarten and that was what the spelling sample looked like, that would be a different conversation. That would be a warning sign. Difficulty pronouncing familiar words. So I mean like saying breakfast as breakfast. So we're missing some sounds or we're having difficulty pronouncing a familiar word. Look at the right side then, more of our kindergarten age students, early first grade. Some warning signs that I would want to look out for is, one, do we know if there's a history of language or reading problems in their parents or siblings? This is because dyslexia is known to be hereditary in nature. So this does not mean every parent that had dyslexia is going to have a child with dyslexia, but it is helpful information to know when thinking about warning signs. If they are also showing some of these others, like difficulty associating sounds with letters with alphabet instruction. So they're school-age children, they're learning the alphabet, they're learning their sounds. Are they having difficulty retaining that and recalling that? Do they have failure to break apart words into syllables like basketball? Are they struggling to read what's called CVC words, consonant, vowel, consonant words like big, cat, hug? These are all short vowel sound words with just 3 sounds, very phonetic. Do they avoid reading, or are they starting to state that reading's hard and they don't want to pick up a book even to pretend read? So a variety of behaviors or warning signs that we want to be aware of. Really in order to make sure that we're catching our students early and providing them really solid instruction from the start. So to your point then, what would solid instruction look like if I want to be proactive or if I want to really start to remediate early? I had 3 main suggestions that I wanted to share with you. Michelle, you opened with the idea of what can we do right now to set our kids up for success. So just on that note, here we go. First up would be working with sound games. So if I want to develop phonological or phonemic awareness skills, early literacy skills in emergent readers, one example could be playing the I Spy game. So we would say, I spy with my little eye something that starts with the B sound. And you'd wait for the child to shout out something they see around them that starts with that B sound. Ball, banana, bike. So this is helping the student to identify the initial sounds in words, which is an important building block as students look to grow into strong readers. Phoneme isolation, like that task, really is a critical one. And there are other ways we can do that. So that was an example of that initial phoneme being isolated. We can also work with our final position. So let's see, the sound T in words like part, sit, boot. Students are able to recognize, yes, all of those end with which sound. T. To make this fun though, enjoyable, we can do a lot with picture cards. So you see in the middle of the screen, children are able to decide which one's the odd one out. So you see picture cards and students name the words, pumpkin, pie, and cake, and they determine that cake is the odd one out. I can also distribute picture cards to my class, and they walk around the room and they're looking for their pair, which is their partner that shares a picture with that same initial sound. So my, let's see, my cheese and my cherry student pair up, and they know that they've found their match because both of those words start with ch. Another one that I wanted to discuss was nursery rhymes. Super fun, right? Row, row, row your boat, hickory dickory dock, twinkle, twinkle, little star. The list goes on, but really fun for developing students' awareness of rhymes and to practice that alliteration. We can ask children to give a thumbs up or thumbs down if 2 words rhyme. So mall and fall, thumbs up, whereas mall and mop, thumbs down. We can list words that rhyme. So if I said mall and we went around the circle and you said fall, then she said wall. And we just continue going to build on real or non-words that contain that all ending. My next slide is recommendations for alphabet knowledge. So alphabet knowledge, there are a lot of layers too. We want students to be able to have letter naming. So look at the beach ball example. Children would catch it whichever letter their thumb is on, they can name the letter. Letter name, they can name the letter sound, or they can name a word that starts with that sound. We can also teach letter names using embedded mnemonics. So this is an approach that Dr. Airy studied, and it's represented with that rainbow up top. Basically, the idea is that the letter naturally conforms to the shape of the object, and the object's initial sound is the letter sound. So rainbow, and the idea that is that it's a scaffold. So students are thinking about the rainbow, thinking about that arc to it, recognizing that whenever they see that letter that's shaped like a little half arc, they think of the rainbow and they know that sound, So it's that initial instruction tool. Eventually, I'm taking the scaffold away, taking the rainbow away, and just showing the letter and saying, what's the sound? And they say, Another example is the importance of letter formation. So handwriting for letters as well as numbers. And the approach that I'm showing here on the screen is the idea of number cues. We can also use verbal cues. So if I was teaching this young child to produce the letter L, I can pair my number cues with my verbal cues. Start at the top, drag down, straight out. Start at the top, drag down, straight out. And they're saying those steps and they're practicing forming their letters correctly. Other fun ways to do it though, children love writing and shaving cream on their desk or forming letters in sand and things like that. Eventually, our goal of all of this though is to get children reading. Back one more minute. One slide back. Thank you. I'm showing the top right picture with the plastic letters. We can then use letters, the letters that students have learned, right? If we talked about them learning maybe they've learned and they've learned d. I'm ready to start building a word like red because they know those letters, they know those sounds, and they're ready to blend them all together to apply it for that ultimate goal of decoding. So at this stage, it's really going to be those consonant, vowel, consonant words again, words like bed, big, mud, so that we're putting together everything we've learned about letters and letter sounds to really read words. My final recommendation then on the last slide is super important. So far, I've focused on reading, meaning decoding and spelling. But proficient reading is, of course, more than that, right? It's not just the physical act of reading and spelling. Even in young readers, it's really about language development because language is so necessary for comprehension. So 3 ideas that I've listed here. The first one is called Strive for 5 Conversations. Recently, Sonia Cabell and Trisha Zucker released a book on this, which is really, in short, about the idea of striving for 5 turn-taking opportunities when we speak to kids. So the initiator starts the conversation with an open-ended question. The child then responds. So let me just demonstrate what I could mean. Instead of just saying, how are you? And a child says, good, and you say, oh, that's good. Instead, reframing that. So tell me about your night last night. I watched TV. Oh, that's so fun. Who were you with? What did you watch? Oh, I watched with my mom and dad, and we watched my favorite show, and this is what happened in the episode. And suddenly we're unlocking so much more language. That's my 4th exchange. And then the teacher jumps in for that final 5th exchange, or the parent, that final 5th exchange of affirming what the child said or summarizing what they said. So often we think of conversations as really 3 exchanges. We ask a question, the child gives a very limited response, and we either move on to the next child or we just say good and move on, when really just striving and prompting for one initial turn for the child and then affirming it can really unlock so much additional language to develop ultimately their comprehension. Reading aloud. Everyone knows the importance of reading aloud to students. This really helps them have rich language experiences. These young readers can't read rich text yet, right? So we have to read aloud to provide these experiences for them. This is how they develop that vocabulary knowledge. This is how they develop syntactic knowledge and so much more. Knowledge of story structures. All of these opportunities come from reading aloud to kids. And then my last tip would be just building out experiences, whether it's going to the supermarket and discussing what's happening, or the zoo, the park, just building out a plethora of experiences, because research shows that students need both word knowledge and world knowledge, experiences, background knowledge, etc. So lots of ideas there to really think about what can we do right now, not only at school, but at home too, to build up these early literacy skills.
That is fantastic. I feel like we all just got a little one-on-one on teacher PD in the early education space. That's fantastic. Actually, a quick question in the Q&A was, could you talk maybe a little bit more on the decoding assessment that educators would use in the partial alphabetic phase, really early?
Yeah, I was going to go into assessment, but I know we have our early bird discussion, so I don't want to go too far into it. But just at a glance, a preview of what I'm sure you're going to hear about would be that idea of phonemic awareness and early alphabet knowledge being what we typically assess. So we want to know if I say a word, can students tell me the initial sound? If I show a letter, can students name the letter? Can they name the sound? These are the types of early literacy assessments that will tell us if students are on track or whether we should, be raising some alarms.
That is fantastic. And, teacher prep is changing. I saw a question in the chat that wasn't in the Q&A. It's just our teachers taught this, and mostly not, but it's changing on teacher prep. And folks like AIM, and I saw other friends in the chat box from Read by Fourth in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania branch of the IDA, really working on higher ed shifts and changes that are possible, and others across the country are working on the teacher prep space. So that was fantastic, Nicole. Thank you. And now we're going to turn to some of our panelists, because we've heard a lot, we've heard two big framing things, right? Policy, and then sort of research to practice, but getting down on the ground, applying this day in, day out in community, in schools. There's so many ways to do this. Our populations are so diverse that we're dealing with, but we want to get there a little bit and show you some of the best practice that's out there today. So I'm going to bring Sue in from Early Bird Education, and I have to say, another longtime Tremaine funded grantee we were so enamored with the neuroscience and the earliest identification that is possible for reading challenges and screenings, and doing it in a ed tech fun applied way for kids and teachers. So Sue, can you talk a little bit about how this is working in terms of professional development and family supports? And I think you're going to help answer some of the questions I've seen about, is this the same in Spanish, and how does it look in Spanish language too?
Great. Thank you, Michelle. There's a lot to talk about. Exciting things going on. So we are Early Bird. Our platform predicts the potential for dyslexia and reading challenges in pre-readers, but also in early readers, pre-K to 2. We were developed and tested at Boston Children's Hospital under the scientific direction of Dr. Nadine Gabb, and in collaboration with researchers at Florida Center for Reading Research. Going on. We all know what the problem is. I don't need to go over this. We have too many children that are not reading by 3rd or 4th grade, and that can have significant downstream effects. This is what we want to avoid. The tragedy of all of this is that it's completely preventable, according to the research and according to the science and according to what we know about neuroscience now. Next slide. Our solution at Early Bird is basically to change the paradigm, to move from what we call a wait to fail model, in which we address student needs after they are failing, and that's usually like 3rd or 4th grade, and we move it way back to a preventative model at pre-K, K, the subject today is K, and that's key, and 1st grade, when intervention is the most effective. We can go on to the next slide. So at Early Bird, how do we make that paradigm shift? Our solution began as a dyslexia screener, and what we learned from teachers and others is that don't just tell me a child is at risk, because that just raises my blood pressure. I have no clue what to do about it. So in the end, we have become an end-to-end platform, starting with first the game-based screener and comprehensive assessment, and then second, a simple intuitive data dashboard where all the data is stored. 3, we know that teachers sometimes struggle with how to interpret the data, so we require data workshops by grade level after each assessment period, beginning of year, middle of year, end of year, where our literacy specialists walk through the data with teachers so they understand what they're looking at. And then, most importantly, that the teachers understand what to do next. So in support of that, we have a Next Steps evidence-based resources platform, very robust, that is curriculum agnostic, can fill in where maybe a curriculum doesn't have quite the right stuff, or to add additional practice. This is tier 1 and all students and students with intervention needs. So if we go on to the next slide, here's the meat. And this goes back to Nicole's presentation really well, because this is the subtest that we have in Early Bird. As you can see, it's very comprehensive. And at each grade level, we have the beginning of year, middle of year, end of year subtests. And you can see when some begin and when some end. And that's when it's developmentally appropriate to test various skills. And this is aligned with the science of reading. You can see the naming speed, the RAN, how fast the brain processes, the sound symbol correspondence that Nicole was talking about. We've got the phonics with the spelling, again, referring back to Nicole's presentation, the phonemic and phonological awareness. And this is the big one, oral language. Many assessments do not have that oral language piece. And we can go on. On the next slide, we'll see just a couple of screenshots of a couple of subtests. Early Bird is really fun for students. It was designed by Learning Games Network and designed to be developmentally appropriate. And that has paid huge dividends, because this is what we hear. Students love it. They finish the assessment and say, can I do it again? Of course they can't until the next benchmark period. But even more important, we've had a lot of anecdotal feedback from teachers saying, I'm assessing kids that I was never able to assess before. So children on the autism spectrum, children with attention or behavioral challenges, and English learners, actually, and we can maybe talk about that a little bit later. So we can go on. And to make all of this happen, I just wanted to give you a little bit of sense of what's under the hood. It's a very sophisticated technology product that we have here. Most importantly, it's research driven. 2 of our 3 founders are researchers. There's nothing that we do that doesn't have a research backing. And then I wanted to focus on auto scored with normed percentiles. That's significant because especially at pre-K, where a lot of assessments are one-on-one, paper pencil with the teacher administering the assessment, the auto-scored and the gamified approach takes the teacher bias out of administration. It takes the teacher bias out of scoring, and the norm percentiles make it really easy to understand the scores and compare to other students. We had a superintendent in Pennsylvania tell us, Early Bird doesn't know if my child is black, brown, or white. They all get treated the same. And then we use computer adaptive technology, item response theory, to get a lot more data in a reasonable amount of time. We have predictive algorithms for dyslexia and word reading challenges. We have amazing technology under this, including AI speech recognition, which allows the child to speak many answers. That's how we can assess pre-readers at such a young age. And then we have the support of our philanthropic funders. I'll publicly say Michelle and Tremaine Foundation is our favorite, but without that, we would not be where we are. And so before I leave this slide, the big question is, does it work? And in a very recent poll, this little yellow bubble up in the right-hand corner, In a very recent poll of teachers using Early Bird, we asked, were you able to identify a child at risk that otherwise would not have been detected? And 73% of the teachers responded yes. And I'm going to show you how on the next slide. It's pretty straightforward. This is the data dashboard. There's a lot here, but once you kind of get oriented, it's pretty straightforward. We've got those categories: naming, speed, sound, symbol, correspondence, phonemic, phonological awareness, and oral language across the top. And I've circled in yellow the middle student there. This shows a number of learning profiles. One in the middle there is the dyslexia student. And if you look across, we can see that this child has the dyslexia risk flag, so missing the skills that would be most predictive of dyslexia. Looks like word reading might be a challenge, slow ran. If you look to the far right, we see these really high oral language skills. This child has an amazing vocabulary, probably talks a lot, memorizes, very active in the classroom. And through those compensating amazing strengths, is able to mask the fact that the phonemic phonological skills they're really struggling with. And so to be able to detect this student now, and we know up to 15% of students are prone to dyslexia, if we can address these skills now, it's easy. We go back to that, we're changing the paradigm slide. We can address this child's needs now when it's easy to have interventions that can actually prevent dyslexia. That's a bold statement, but I'm willing to make it. Yep, go on to the next slide. And then, as I said earlier, teachers told us, like, don't just tell me a child is risk because I don't have a clue. So our Next Steps resources platform, and this is a screenshot of one little bit of it, has a full long page per subtest. So if we know a child is struggling with letter sounds, we focus on letter sounds. We know exactly what it is that the child needs. We have materials, we have scripted lesson plans, progress monitoring tools, at-home materials that can be sent home to support what's going on during the school day. And the cool thing about this is that it's been designed for any teacher, any level of training in the science of reading, and frankly, any level of training in teaching reading in the first place. Teachers can access this no matter kind of where their training journey has been. I'm going to pause there.
All that out, and it's always exciting to think that we can get to this kind of level of identification so early. And there was a quick question though about, are kids anxious? Like, is this a test? Do they feel like this is a test and they're anxious, or is the gamified version of how they're entering this material kind of take that away?
Our experience is that it takes it away. It seriously takes it away. We have, as far as I know, and we're about 60,000 students into this, we have not had one single report of a kid not enjoying it. So that tells you, and that includes all kids with all kinds of.
That's a great testimony. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Wonderful. So thank you for that. Rafal, when I'm thinking about, sort of this whole Kindergarten Matters series is strengthening the kindergarten years, a function of the sturdy bridge between the early years and the early grades. I mean, with your position at EduCare Omaha and the Early Start, Head Start and Head Start program, you're like a critical part of that that continuum there. So how are you and your early learning educators kind of working to support kids who have sort of learning differences in their transition to kindergarten?
I'm constantly reminded of one of my saying that one of my former supervisors shared with me very early in my early childhood career, was back in the mid-90s. And she said, first, do the basics well. And one of the things that I think about in terms of the basics that we do in early childhood is focusing on what has long been known as developmentally appropriate practice. And one of those key components of developmentally appropriate practice is around social and emotional development for children. And that has proven incredibly critical in the 90s and the early aughts, and certainly today. I think one of the things that has happened in early childhood, a focus has been laid very heavily on the word education when we think about early childhood education. But it's also critically important that we think about child development, particularly when we're thinking about the age group of the children that we're serving in these programs. My programs specifically have children 6 weeks to 5 years old. And when we're thinking about what those children are learning and what's happening with them development-wise, we need to make sure that the things that we're doing with them are developmentally appropriate. Many times parents will expect that their 3-year-old or their 4-year-old is reading or doing multiplication. But we have to also ensure that a child's social emotional development is ready for the educational development that's going to happen for them. So when I think about the slides that we have, if you can go to the next slide, one of the pieces that we always like to focus on is around Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory and how the child is at the center and how everyone in the program approaches supporting the child and their family, particularly as it relates to ensuring that we recognize that children come to us as a part of a family. And so a critical piece of the work that we do in Head Start and early Head Start programs, and particularly at Educare, is around professional development for staff to help them understand that there is a difference and an understanding there as it relates to early childhood education and child development. So that's a critically important piece there that professional development is allowed to provide for our teaching staff, but not just our teaching staff, because as a part of Head Start and early Head Start, there are 3 tenets, as I like to refer to it. The child development piece, of course, which is the biggest and most common piece, because that encompasses the teachers who care for the young children. And then we have the family support and engagement piece, because I often say children don't come to us alone. They bring their families. So we need to embrace and encourage their families as well. And then, of course, there's the health and nutrition component of the program to ensure that there are mental health supports for the children and the families. And a 4th tenet that I usually like to throw in there is around community. These programs are living, breathing things just like the children in the program. So the communities have to support and embrace them in very much the same way that we do within the program.
So much I love, it's that true holistic view of the child, of the community. Where are these supports? And again, like how a whole community has sort of a shared vision of what's needed for support. So thank you for that. And we'll come back to you in a little bit too. And I want to bring in Robai. I mean, Robai, you've been like 20 years of experience and now in academia and special education and just working with individuals who have learning differences and specific learning disabilities. What are you finding that's effective in establishing like really strong systems of intervention?
Well, thank you for bringing me on. So yeah, as I was listening to everybody contribute, and I realized that I come in a unique position as somebody who was a teacher, classroom teacher for special education for about 16 years, working with those students who struggled with reading, basic reading skills. And now I find myself in academia preparing teachers who are going to be working with those group of students. And so in my just thinking about what to contribute to this conversation, I think about the multi-tiered systems of support and their role in early literacy skills. Next slide, please. And so, yeah, many of you, most of us, I would say, are familiar with this diagram here. When you look at it, maybe when you see this image, all of us think about MTSS. So obviously, MTSS is the framework, and I would reiterate that it's a framework that encompasses both academic and emotional and behavioral needs for our students, because we do understand that both these service risk factors for school failure for students. But for the purpose of our discussion, I will focus on RTI, or response to intervention, which it's a framework that's been around since the early 2000s. And again, I would reiterate that on this framework, that first tier, early intervention, tier 1, is really critical, because in essence, it does set a precedence for what is going to happen in the other tiers. And so in my experience, what happens at tier 1 is really crucial, because it does set that precedence. And MTSS and RTI in this case is not a specific program. I want to reiterate that again, or it's not a prescribed curriculum as it has been mistaken. Rather, it is a framework that is meant to guide stakeholders that are working with students to support their reading in those early years, to coalesce or bring together tools and systems of support for the purpose of ensuring that all students receive the support they need to achieve those proposed outcomes. Next slide, please. And so when we think of MTSS, and I was, as I was listening to the contributions of the other speakers, and specifically what Dr. Wright talked about, the priorities of forces. So this is at the core of MTSS, really, what the priorities that authors said, and just generally the Department of Education for early intervention for the students, and giving students the support and they need to be successful in the early reading skills. These are the things that we talk about, obviously focusing on every child, but solving the problems of the child individually. As you can see, I've highlighted some of those other things, which includes the evidence-based practices, high quality instruction, assessing and screening students to identify areas of concern, and progress monitoring and database decision making and timely information. All that has been spoken about. We find that in a team, in an MTSS approach, these are the things that have to happen for the those working with students for those early reading skills to be able to see the results they want that would help the students. Next slide, please. So when we think about MTSS framework, we have some components that we consider to be very critical. So the procedures and the practices that I just mentioned, they really do not happen in abyss. So MTSS provides a guideline for the ingredients that must be present to successfully shepherd students towards those desired reading outcomes in the early grades. So the bottom line is there must be effective instructional leadership that provides support necessary to facilitate the outcomes. So these supports include, they're not limited to, but include professional development and training that is adequate, and sustained supports for teachers, as well as bringing all stakeholders along so that they are partners in supporting these reading outcomes for the students. And with the main, with these stakeholders, at the heart of it is the parents, and really bringing those parents in and elevating them as equal partners in supporting the efforts to bring these outcomes to the students. Next slide, please. And so it does also require using a valid assessment and research-based evidence, research-based curriculums. And I'm also happy to hear about the work that is being done with the organization, with Sue, and also what Nicole shared earlier. And all these are things, the programs that seem to have evidence base that is really critical in supporting students through all the tiers of support, and most importantly, in delivering that instruction using the evidence-based programs across the tiers. Next slide, please. I'm rushing through this, and I'll probably talk about it more. Okay. And so all these components are working together simultaneously as they work as a well-oiled machine, and it's what required and it, for a successful MTSS where everybody is held accountable and desired student outcomes are realized. Again, I have to reiterate that it is not a one-person approach, but a team approach. And also it's a framework. It is only as successful as the instructional leadership and ability to establish and support and sustain all these systems coming together. And I'll stop at that because I know I have to come back to that again.
Well, wonderful. And you know, we've been focusing sort of a lot in the classroom, and you know, we know that we sometimes, and well, we really need to go beyond. We need to have some collaboration, right, with general education teachers, special education teachers, families, you know, to support kids with learning differences and specific learning disabilities. So Robai, why don't we just go right back to you and maybe talk about some of the family engagement you've been supporting.
So yeah, family engagement is really critical, especially when working. Obviously, when you think about reading instruction, a lot of stakeholders on the school, front might, hesitate to involve parents for a myriad of reasons. And in my experience, one a particular reason is when you are working with families from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds who have issues of, things like language barriers. So that impede them from engaging and participating. But for a success in reading and supporting students, both at school and making sure that the skills that they're learning, they are being enhanced at home, it is critical that parents become part of the equation. And so what it means in many cases is that you are helping the parents understand what is going on within the school, and also providing the support and needs for them to actually support the students at home. This is critical in many ways, because then we do not have a break in what the students are learning. We know, especially that if you're working with students who have a reading disability, those breaks in instruction usually lead to them losing what they've learned. And then when they come back to the teachers, then you're starting from, square one, going to the drawing board, and you do not want to do that as a teacher or as a school district. So helping the parents, giving them the tools, equipping them the tools that would support them in enhancing those skills at home for those periods of time, so that they are not with the teachers at school, is really critical. So let's go back to that other slide again. So go ahead, sorry. The previous slide. And so I just wanted, since this slide is up, I just wanted to talk generally about the implications, apart from, the parents, involving the parents. Obviously, within MTSS, you are involving everybody. You're bringing everybody on board. You're providing them with the training they need, giving them the support they need to be able to provide the necessary instruction to the students. But the bottom line, for early reading for the students when it comes to MTSS and reading instruction is making sure that you are assessing students. This is the school or the teacher, and I'm speaking at the teacher level because of my experience as a teacher. And again, I did see a question about what do you do? Somebody from New Orleans posted a question about what materials and what support do you have, and how can you help students who are struggling. So assessment is key. At the first, before you do anything, when you have a class of students in front of you in kindergarten or preschool, or you have a new student that walks into your class, first and foremost, you have to provide assessment, give them a screening at the beginning to really gauge where they are in this continuum of skills that they're supposed to acquire in those early reading programs. And you do this before you provide any instruction, so that you do understand where the students are. And the reason you do this, especially when you're working with students with disabilities, is that before you establish where the student is, it doesn't matter what you do. For example, a kindergartner that does not know phonemic awareness, does not know their letter sounds, they would not be able to isolate, which is a more advanced skill than knowing the letter sounds. So really gauging where the students are and starting with where they are so that they master those basic skills is really critical. So using assessment that is valid and reliable is really critical. There was a question about what kinds of assessments are there, and I shared this example, DBOS, which is out of Oregon University. And for those teachers that probably are not able to, don't have access to assessment tools, this is a free tool that is available to the teachers, and you can assess those basic foundational skills like letter name fluency, phoneme segmentation fluency. Those you can find, and they're really available for free. And then the next thing is utilizing evidence-based practices and strategies, and also, and I underscore this, with fidelity. And first of all, I'll talk about our practice that has research base that has backed it for many years, since the early years of 1968, and this is direct instruction programs using those, and universal design for learning are other programs that we have evidence-based that back them to support students' reading skills. But another key that I would also build up with fidelity, the biggest tragedy in my experience, both as a teacher and now working as a faculty preparing teachers, is having teachers who are not trained to use the programs that are out there, and having teachers who are not well versed with what is a good program for teaching those early skills and what is not a good program, not preparing them to understand that. And I know that is the honors of teacher preparation programs. We have to do our part in preparing those teacher candidates when they go into the field, so that they have the knowledge base to to discern or distinguish between good, well evidenced or well validated programs for use in providing instruction for those early literacy skills, and also remediating those skills. And speaking of remediation, it is critical that the skills are remediated immediately. And MTSS offers that framework to do that, so that students who are struggling, despite you as a teacher providing the high quality instruction that is based on evidence, you have a few students that are struggling, then you can recommend them for the second tier, which is tier 2, and that they receive highly qualified instruction to remediate the skills that they're struggling in. And lastly, talking about monitoring progress, we have to keep a tab on how students are responding to your instruction, and evaluate your instruction, and to make sure that you make the decisions, those database decisions on how to move forward. If you are using a program and half of your class or all the students are not doing well, then it might be a problem with the program. We don't know this. Then you use that data to go back on the drawing board. Am I right, using the right program? And if the answer to that is yes, then you have to look at your strategies and skills. Are they evidence-based? Are you following, for example, direct instruction strategies as has been outlined? And then if the answer is not, then you are looking at, when you find the answers are yes to these other things, and then the student might need some more comprehensive evaluation. Maybe they are that student that needs specialized instruction under special education. And so implementing these things in a sequence, it's really helpful for teachers so that they can be able to provide what is needed for the students, for that overarching goal to get them ready for more reading, which happens in those advanced grade levels, 4th grade and above.
Appreciate everything you brought to the table. You wove so many things together. I'm gonna pivot back to Sue so we can talk a little bit more about what's happening, with Early Bird and this notion of, collaboration from teachers to families. So
Sure. Yeah,
back
that's
to
great.
you.
Thank you. This is a map of where we are now. We're in 24 states. We have hundreds of school partnerships. As I said, over 60,000 students have been assessed so far. But in the spirit of collaboration, what I would focus on is we work with schools that are public, charter, parochial, private. We work with collaborations such as early learning coalitions, things like that. We work with a number of states, either in a partnership or on their state list, or with reimbursement programs right now, Massachusetts, Maine, Rhode Island, Montana, Georgia, South Carolina, and that list is growing as well. We believe that this is all about collaboration, which I'm sure is why you asked that question specifically. And then we got a lot of demand from families. So we would get calls all the time, and you can go on to the next slide, that this kind of assessment, these resources were not available at school. And so we actually, brand new, have launched an arm of Early Bird that we call Early Bird at Home. And through that program, families can access the assessment directly with one of our literacy specialists, and then follow on with PIP School, which is not assessment, rather it is a gamified intervention that focuses on those very most basic skills that we've been talking about a lot today that children must master in order to continue with their learning to read progress. So this is brand new, very excited about it. We're always interested in other collaborations. We have partnerships also. This is a continuum, just like we just heard from Robai. There's assessment, and then there's intervention, and there's progress monitoring, and it's a full circle. And so we work with a lot of partners who provide the intervention or the professional development or things like that, providing the baseline assessment, very robust assessment, almost a neuropsych, frankly, that can support all the other steps, both for tier 1 and tier 2, for gen ed, for special ed, to get the kids what they need.
Thanks for bringing in the MTSS again on that conversation. That was great. We're just weaving everything together. Glenna, I also wanted to turn back to you, just, from your experience space, your policy perspective, where are you seeing, just sparks of collaboration?
I hear a lot of conversation about the need to collaborate with parents and families, as well as educators and policymakers. We've identified that it takes all of us working together, but one of the things that I think that we may miss the mark is when we talk about collaboration, we frequently are not talking about really true, authentic collaboration together. We're talking about kind of surface level of sharing of information rather than really digging into the work together, identifying issues that we can solve together, and then creating plans from those diverse perspectives. And so that's one of the things that we're trying to work at. We fund over 100 parent training and information centers, as well as regional centers that are focused at not only supporting parents and families of children with disabilities with getting them information about their rights and how to support their children's learning, but also providing that same type of support to educators and leaders in schools and programs. And so I'll drop the link to that into the chat. But I think let's start with looking at the resources that we have and then figuring out how we can really have these conversations in depth and use them to move beyond kind of surface level admiring of the issues and work at solving them.
I love that you're bringing in that sense of advocacy, from the family level as well. And, the campaign for grade level reading is a great space to keep thinking about how do we go deeper on these collaborations that we've been surfacing today. Nicole, let's bring you back in too, from your AIM perspective. I know it takes a lot of collaboration to change systems, and just what you've been thinking about around that.
Yeah, have my teacher hat on today. A lot of what I think and what we can do right now to think about struggling readers is a big time collaboration between home and school. So, just having dialogue about what can people be doing at home, always reinforcing the value of reading aloud to kids, always, building experiences, whether it's watching videos together or going places or whatever's available, prioritizing resources that are sent home. So if we send home an alphabet arc and talking about the value of letter naming and sounds, just I think parents want to help, caregivers want to help, and they just need some solid, not extremely time consuming ideas to just reinforce the work that's being done in schools. Because with struggling readers, it's just more of the same, more repetition. So time in school's not going to be enough at all. Like, we have to get it home as well, in whichever ways are available to people. Can be simple with no materials. I tried to share ideas for both of those. So just doing what we can to make these ideas available at home and get that repetition in.
But I can even feel through the repetition and there are creative ways for the engagement to happen, for the joy to be there, so that these kids are learning and connecting with the people around them. That kind of went back to what Rafael was saying about just sort of the holistic view of the child and family and community. And we're sorry that Rafael had an emergency and wasn't able to offer some more perspectives, but we will make sure you have access to his slides as well. And then I just want to give a huge thanks to this panel. So Glenna and Nicole and Sue and Robai and Rafael. You have brought so much just care and thought and practice and experience to this conversation. I think we can really change these systems so that in kindergarten, in like some of this early bedrock of family to school, this is a place where we can really, as Sue said, start to prevent some of the learning differences impacts if we wait too long to intervene, right? If we do it now, if we do it in kindergarten, do it early, we're going to have reading success for so many more kids. It's so important. So I think you are getting the GLR engagement poll. So why don't you participants try and help us and answer the engagement poll now, and at the same time, please put any more Q&A into the Q&A box. It's even easier than finding it in the chat. And I'll go ahead And one question we have, and maybe this is for you, Nicole, but I think we're looking at different languages, and the question in the Q&A box is, would, I think, some of these interventions look similar in Spanish? Are the markers the same, I think, for identifying reading challenges?
Yeah, so in terms of the reading development progression and those developmental indicators, that would be definitely across languages. And in terms of the instruction and really breaking down, do we start with phonemic awareness at sound level, looking for words that share sounds, moving into explicit instruction of the alphabet with letter naming and sounds? All of that would be the same approach across languages to develop proficient readers.
And Sue, I know you've got some thoughts on this.
Yeah, yes. Last spring, supported by MDRC and funded with Gates Foundation money, we looked deeply into bilingual assessment because there's so much swirling out there around that. And we had a roundtable, we did a white paper, everything. In summary, some of the things that we learned is that we had suspected that students who are Spanish speakers and use our assessment we were generating great information. They were low in oral language, but we could tell whether or not their phonemic phonological awareness was sound, in which case don't have to worry about that student so much. Or is it the other way around? And in any case, so that confirmed what we were already doing. And beyond that, we learned for sure that translating an assessment into Spanish is not the solution. And that's what a lot of assessments are doing right now. So beware of that. And instead, we're looking at the latest research around bilingual assessment, including, for instance, if we just provide the instructions in Spanish, so children understand what they're supposed to do. When the assessment is around blending, they need to know that they're listening for a sound and putting two sounds together. That once they understand that, then we're still assessing the same, can they hear the sounds? There are a lot of sounds that are the same in both languages. And then on top of that, we're looking at a new or sort of a research-driven approach, which is allowing students to answer in any language. So they do the assessment, but they can answer in Spanish, or they can answer in English, or they can answer in Spanglish, getting to their strengths. That's kind of a strengths-based approach, and we're really excited about that. So at some point down the road, you'll see Early Bird moving in that direction.
Well, thank you, Sue. Again, if we have time for a few questions, if they're there, and let's see, one just popped up. Is this program free? I think they mean Early Bird.
Don't we all wish that it were free? Yeah, unfortunately, as you saw, there's quite a technology platform under there. It is not free, but it is also middle of the road priced for assessments. So we're trying to make sure that we are not out of reach for any school, for any situation, because our mission is to get this to every single child. And if you want to contact us, we can talk more about that.
Good. Do any of our other panelists have any other reflections, something that was on their mind, something that got sparked in the conversations or exchanges today?
Hi, how are you? So yeah, I will. If I did provide some resources on the last one of my slides, the last slide, and I just wanted to kind of point that and discuss a few other resources based on a question that was asked in the chat earlier. So I don't know if you're able to put that slide up or if you're done. I'll pull it up on my end. So I did provide resources for the resources that I provided. There are one for the direct instruction that I kept talking about that has been validated as a way and format or way of teaching reading at the early stages. There's a lot of data that has validated that a good way of teaching students. And also, if you're wondering what program to choose for using, if you want to do the Early Bird or any other program, there's a list of ISA approved the DI programs, and I provided a link for that. So what you can do is just go into your school and look at what your school has provided or what you're using for instructing the students, and check and see, does it have research or data that shows that it is a good program for teaching those early reading skills. And another resource is the What Was Clearinghouse. It's another one that has a lot of programs out there that are used and are commercially available, and it lets you know if it is a research or evidence program or not. But the last two that I'm going actually to share in the link to everybody is how to assess the reading skills. If you're not, if you don't have any of these programs, or you're a teacher or not teaching, in a school district that does not provide you with, these resources, we have DeVos Oregon that is free, and it's available to you as a teacher. You can actually assess those early skills, the phonemic awareness and decoding skills. And as I said, it's free. All you need to do is create an account, and you will be accessible to it. And also another one that is free is Intervention Central. It has assessment tools for those reading programs. And I'm talking this at a teacher level, where you are in a situation where you do not have those tools already provided for you in your school, or if you're a parent working with a child and you want to assess the child, then those are some of the free tools that you can use. That's all I wanted to share. Thank you.
There have been a lot more postings in the chat with links to resources. I thank this panel again. I think I'm turning it back over to Sierra to help with some upcoming announcements from GLR, but thanks everybody again.
Yeah, and thank you, Michelle, for moderating this conversation. It was excellent. And thank you to all of our panelists, to Nicole, to Sue, Glenna, Robai, and I know Rafael had to hop off early, but thank you all of you for sharing this amazing work and kind of driving into this point on why it's so important to focus in on this important subject and to do it at early ages so that we can actually support these learners as they go through their educational experience. The chat box was filled with excitement about resources and links and slides. And so all of those materials will be sent out in a follow-up email on Friday to everyone who registered. So keep an eye out in your inbox and you'll be getting access to all of those resources, and we'll be sending those your way. And then, yes, like Michelle said, I did just want to promote some of our upcoming webinars that we have. So Evan, if you want to pull up that slide. Next week, I do know that we'll be having an exciting double header. First, we'll be having a Crucible of Practice Salon session, which will focus on family engagement strategies with Learn to Earn Dayton. These Crucible of Practice Salons, if you haven't attended one before, I highly recommend that you do. They take place in a meeting format on Zoom, and so it's a good opportunity for us to be, a little bit more conversational in the work that's being done. So I encourage you to join us there. And then at 3 p.m. Eastern that same time, we'll have another Big Bets Working conversation focused on expanded learning and expanded recovery, focused on how after-school programs drive student progress. And so lots of great sessions coming up. And as posted in the chat, we will have another doubleheader on March 19th. So I highly recommend that you keep an eye on your inbox for all of these opportunities and register if you can. But thank you again, everyone, for listening in. And thank you again to our lovely panel. And I hope you all have a great rest of your evening.